now we have 45,001, and this became a full standard on the 12th of March this year. And as soon as the standard was published, OHSAS 18,001 was withdrawn. Companies that still have the 18,001 have 3 years to make the transition. But 45,001 is now the new standard. You may say, why is it called 45,001 and not ISO 18,000? There is already an ISO 18,000, and it's all to do with radio frequencies. So that number couldn't be used anymore as far as an international standard, an ISO, was concerned. So we have the new numbering system. And it is the first occupational health and safety standard that provides a complete framework. And we see that there are now a number of benefits with this new standard. Its integrated approach. It is now much easier to integrate the standard with other management system standards that have made the transition over to a high-level structure. The standard is generic and applies to all sizes of organizations, small and large. The standard itself has been simplified. Gone are the large paragraphs, and now we have simple sentence structures, which makes it a lot easier to understand what the requirements are. So this very much facilitates implementation and also auditing of and using the standard as an audit tool. We also have in the 45,001 new concepts. So we have something called the context of the organization that is new. Leadership is emphasized. It was there in 18,001 as management commitment, but now we have leadership, and the participation and consultation of workers it's far more emphasized. Planning as well has been expanded. And we also have support as a new clause for the standard, although some of the things in support we find are old friends that come from the 18,001. Operation is there, and again we have more detail in the section 8 operation, clause 8. And we have this concept of risk. Risk was there in 18,001, but now it's much more emphasized and comes under planning. So absolutely the 45,001, it's really demonstrating leadership and commitment of your company to being a health and safety conscious organization. It's also looking to see that, and it is a format to be able to help you control your occupational health and safety risks. And we always want to improve. How can we improve our performance for health and safety? Implementing 45,001 can really help us do that. Here on the screen, we can see the structure of the standard. This is in fact the structure of 9,014 and 45,001 now. Where has this high-level structure come from? Where have these 10 clauses come from? Well, in 2010, ISO sent out a survey, and they asked a number of certification bodies and various clients and organizations to really help with trying to improve the standards, the way they were structured, the terminology, to get a better tool for organizations to use. And what happened was that in 2012, a committee was set up. It's the Joint Technical Coordination Group, and they did a lot of work to try and create a document which talked about what was in what comprises a standard, who writes standards, the structure of standards, terminology, and everything to do with standards. And this was the ISO IEC Directive Part 1. At the end of this directive, there is an annex, and it's known as Annex SL. Annex SL gives the structure, the high-level structure, the 10 clauses that you see on the screen. And it gives the basic requirements. So if you pick up the directive and you were to read through the Annex SL and then you were to read 45,001, you would quickly recognize the information in the Annex SL being replicated in the 45,001. We also find it in the 9,001 and the 14 and the 27,001. All the standards that migrated over have the basic text. The clauses that are in blue are the clauses that are auditable. So those are the clauses that are auditable by a third-party auditor from Bureau Veritas. They are also the clauses that you will audit yourselves as part of internal auditing. When we look at the 45,001 and the 14,001, for example, we see that there are specific discipline and standard requirements. So, and we tend to, for the 45,001 and the 14 and the 9,000, we tend to find those discipline-specific requirements in Section 6 planning, in Section 8 operation, and we also find it in improvement as well. So those are really the add-ons that you find for the health and safety. We find the information is mostly in Section 6, 8 and 10. There are obviously other areas as well. The standard has changed from 18,001, and we see most of the changes are really at the front end of the standard. So we're looking at clauses 4, which is brand new, 5 expanded, 6 more information, 8 more information, but there's more changes at the front than there are at the back. When we look at the standard, we see that it's all based on Plan, Do, Check, Act. This is not new. We found this in the 18,001 standard. But Plan, Do, Check, Act is a model. It's a model that came about from work that Schuhart and following him Deming as well, quality gurus, did, looking at processes and also the way that processes evolved and the way processes are. And we have this Plan, Do, Check, Act that we can apply to processes. So we see this in the standard. So when we're thinking about plan, we have a clause, planning. Then we have the do, which is the actual operations and support. Then we have checking. Checking is now called performance evaluation. So that's the checking part of the standard. And then we have act, which is improvement. So this goes round and round in a circle, plan, do, check, act. And we can see at the heart of this plan, do, check, act cycle, we can see that there is leadership and worker participation. And they are at the heart of the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, and the heart of the standard. We see that we have leadership and worker participation. Extremely important, and we need to ensure that leaders lead, take charge, and also promote a health and safety culture, and work very closely with workers as well, and in order to get a very robust health and safety system. Because we want to make sure that our intended outcomes, our performance, is as good as we can possibly get. Because ultimate goal, we want to reduce injuries, and we want to make sure we don't have any fatalities and nasty work-related diseases. Outside of this Plan, Do, Check, Act is the context of the organisation. In the context of organisation, which is Clause 4, we have issues, interested parties, scope, and this is and the quality management systems itself. Health and safety management system itself, and this is where we find the organisation. So this is all about organisation of your business, of your company, and it's trying to say to the world, this is who we are, and these are the people that we need to respond to, our interested parties, and these are the things that we think about our issues. you can see this logical progression through the standard. And it really is thinking about a company from its start. So when you're thinking about an organisation, what do we need to think about with health and safety? How do we start off? What does our company entail? Who is in our company? What do we make? What do we provide? The context of the organisation. And we can see the clauses underneath there. Then we have leadership and worker participation. And it's all about commitment of leadership, and they have a very much a greater role than we saw in 18001. The occupational health and safety policy is put with underneath leadership, and also roles, responsibilities, accountabilities and authorities reside in leadership, clause 5. So does worker participation and consultation, unsurprisingly under clause 5. Clause 6, planning. This is where we have everything to do with risks and opportunities, and we're trying to plan and make sure that we understand, okay, what are our hazards, what are our risks with regards to health and safety, what do we need to do to address those risks, and they could be opportunities for improvement. And part of that as well is looking at objectives and goals to try and help us improve. On the activity side, we've got support mechanisms. So we've got clause 7 support, where we find resources, people, equipment, standards. Then we have competence. Are people able to do their work in a safe way? Do they understand what they need to do? Are they competent? And are they aware of hazards and risks? Then we also have communication as part of the support mechanisms. Extremely important. We need to communicate all these things that we are discussing, the issues, risks, hazards, policies. We need to communicate them within and outside of our organisation as well. And then another support mechanism is documented information, an umbrella term. Then we also have operation. Operation, we find, again, emphasis on planning and control of our activities. How are we controlling our activities to minimize risk? Because we want to try and eliminate hazards, reduce risks. Then this is where we find change management. And this is a new subclause. We also find procurement as a new subclause, and under procurement, we find contractors and outsourcing as subclauses. In modern day businesses, we often find that we are using outsourced processes. So this is much more of a modern day approach. And of course, we have emergency preparedness and response as an operational process. Then under check, performance evaluation. We're checking, monitoring, measuring, analyze, evaluating. Internal audits comes under here, and now management review comes under checking. And this is the right place for it, not under leadership, because leaders are checking. They're checking and evaluating how well are we doing with our health and safety systems. And then finally, act. So we're looking to improve. An improvement may come on the back of, unfortunately, an incident or an accident, a non-conformity, and then the corrective actions involved. But it can also come through a breakthrough. So people may have devised new techniques or thought about new ways of working. Let's have a look at some of the key changes that we see between 45001 and the OHSAS 18001. So the context of the organisation. This is understanding. Understanding of issues. Issues can be positive or negative. In the English language, we tend to think of the word issues as being something negative. But actually here in the standard, and in all the management system standards that have transitioned to the high-level structure, issues relates to something that we need to think about, something to consider, and they can be positive and they can be negative. And it's all about the way that you manage and organise your health and safety responsibilities. What are the key changes? Workers and interested parties, more detail, more emphasis on them. their needs, their expectations, and consulting, participating, making sure that they're involved. This goes hand in hand with leadership as well, because leaders, much more of a greater list, the greater requirements that they need to do. They have to promote positive occupational health and safety culture. So it really is a case that leadership, worker participation and consultation has now been emphasised. We know risks and opportunities as well. We're always looking at what are our potential risks, and on the flip side of that, what could be an opportunity to improve. Section 7.5 has this phrase documented information, and this phrase replaces the words document and record. We don't find these words in the 45001 standard anymore. We find the phrase documented information, and they can be maintained or retained. Operational planning and control, far more detail here in this section. We're now clearly stating the hierarchy of controls. Multi-employer workplaces are also mentioned within operational planning and control. Management of change, outsourcing, procurement, contractors. Performance evaluation. This has now been clarified. So we now have more of a list to say, okay, what do we need to do? Maybe we need to figure out what methods we're going to employ to evaluate our occupational health and safety performance. Under that as well, we need to make sure we're compliant. Health and safety comes with it. There's a raft of legislation in every country, and every organisation needs to adhere to legal requirements and make sure that they know what the status is. So this is something that's now been emphasised. What is the status of compliance? And also, do we know, does an organisation have the knowledge to be able to comply to any legal requirements? Management review, because we've got context now and we've got emphasis on leadership, unsurprisingly, there are more inputs into management review. And then under incident non-conformity and corrective action, the phrase preventive action has been replaced. We don't find the phrase preventive action anymore in the transition standards. It was often confused with corrective action. And corrective action takes place when an incident or an accident or an injury has occurred, and you're trying to look to see what are the actions to correct it, make sure it doesn't happen again. But preventive action was often confused with that, and preventive action is really all about risk and saying, okay, let's have a look at our processes, what are the hazards and what are the associated risks, and can we eliminate or reduce those risks? And this is why the phrase preventive action has been removed, and we now have the terminology of risks and improvement. Let's have a look at the two standards side by side so we can compare. So when we're looking at the beginning of the standard, we have the introduction, no change there. The scope, that's still the same, that's the scope of the standard, and these are non-auditable parts. Clauses 1, 2 and 3 are non-auditable. Clause 2 is the normative references. In 18,001 it was the reference publications. Normative references in 45,001, well, it says there aren't any, because all the terms and definitions are in the standard. This is not the case for 9001, where you have a separate standard, ISO 9000, which has all the terms and definitions. But here we've got the normative references. Then clause 3, terms and definitions, and no change with the clause heading. Clause 4 is new. So we know that clause 4 is new. We don't find that in 18,001. We don't find that terminology of context. What we do find the terminology of interested parties. That's in 18,001. But now it's really split and clarified into issues, under section 4.1, 4.2 interested parties. 4.3 is the scope. That's the scope of your management system, occupational health and safety management system. And we found the scope previously in 4.1 general requirements. Also in general requirements was this overview about what is a management system, the occupational health and safety management system. This has now been pulled out, and we have now very clear requirements on looking at processes under section 4.4. Section 5, clause 5 is leadership, and we didn't find that phrase before, but we did find participation of workers. But now we have it split up, so we have section 5.1 is all about leadership and commitment, and here we have a big list, which we'll see a little bit later. The policy, that's still there. Organisational roles, responsibilities and authorities, that came under 4.4.1 before, now has been firmly placed under the remit of leaders. And that's the right place for that to go, because leaders need to be accountable and responsible for the organisational roles. It doesn't mean to say they have to write them. It can be delegated, but their accountability resides with the leaders. Section 5.4, consultation and participation of workers. This was 4.3.2, participation and consultation. But again, we have more detail in this section. Then we go on to planning. Planning, we found that in 4.3, it was called planning. But now we have this 6.1, actions to address risks and opportunities, and a subclauses of general. Here this talks about the fact that you need to document your risks and opportunities. 6.1.2, hazard identification. We found that previously under 4.3.1, hazard identification, and also assessment of risks and opportunities. We had risk assessment. Didn't really talk so much about opportunities in 18,001, but we now have it clearly stated in 45,001. Legal, we still have to figure out what our legal requirements are. But then 6.1.4, planning action, that's new as a subclause, and we don't find that in 18,001. Objectives, we found that in 4.3.3, objectives and program, but we have it split now into the objectives and then the plans to achieve your goals and your targets for health and safety. Clause 7 is support. And we didn't find that as a clause statement, that's a new term, but we can see how it's been split up now in 45,001. So we have section 7.1 resources, which we found in 4.4.1. 7.2 is competence, where we found it in competence training and raising awareness. 7.3 is actually awareness now. 7.4 is communication. Previously it was 4.4.3, communication, participation and consultation. Participation and consultation has gone into leadership. And now we have communication on its own, but split as per 14,001, but not 9,001. 9,001 has a single clause. 14 and 45,001, we see it split into internal and external communication. Why? Why the difference? 14 and 45,001 often have legal applications and legal things that need to be considered and communicated. So you often have to communicate outside your organisation to external parties about your status, your legal status. So there's a requirement for external communication, hence this subclause. Documented information, we find a 7.5. It was split up in 18,001, but we've now brought it all together under one subclause, documented information. So we have general, creating and updating, and control of your documented information. Notice there's no mention of documents or records. Clause 8 is operation. And here we find operational planning and control. Again, an underline on planning. This was something that came out of the 2010 survey, was that it was felt that planning wasn't necessarily done as well as it could do. And sometimes I know we're only human, we try to leap in and get things fixed, get things done, when we don't necessarily always plan as well as we could do. But here we see an echo of clause 6, planning, here in operational planning and control. Underneath planning and control, we find that we have general, the subclause general, and then eliminating hazards and reducing occupational health and safety risks. This is where we find the hierarchy of controls. Also under operational planning and control, we find the management of change. Change management was in 18001, but now we have it clearly stated in a subclause. A new subclause is procurement, 814. Under procurement, we find contractors and outsourcing, now clearly defined with requirements. Emergency preparedness and response, we had that previously. Clause 9, performance evaluation. This was verification, it was measuring, monitoring, it was a little bit mixed. Now we have it clearly stated as a checking requirement. So we're evaluating, we monitor, measure, analyze, and evaluate. Very importantly, this word evaluation is here. We don't just monitor and measure, we don't just create the pretty spreadsheets and the charts. We do something with the information to improve our health and safety performance. So what do we find? We have a general requirement, and then we're looking to see, are we compliant? Very important, legal requirements. Are we compliant with our legal and obligations? 9.2 is internal audit, and we found that before, but it's split now into general and then the program to actually carry out these internal audits. Management review is firmly sitting in section 9, clause 9. It was 4.6 before, which was the last clause in the 18001. Clause 10, improvement. We didn't find that, and you don't find that in the 18001 as a clause, but now we have that there because it's part of Plan, Do, Check, Act, and it's that Act part. And here we have a general clause. Then we have the incidents, non-conformity and corrective actions. Note, preventive action has been dropped. Not dropped really, moved into section 6, clause 6, planning. And then finally, we have continual improvement as a subclause, something that was new. It wasn't there in the 18001 as a clause, but now it is clearly stated as to how can we improve. Prior to the 45001, we had the OHSAS 18001. It was not an international standard. It was not adopted throughout the world. The 45001 is now an ISO standard, International Standards Organization, and it's something that's been addressed by ISO. And also, we now have something that is far easier to integrate. It's something that we can use as a standard, and we can use it with the other management system standards. So this high-level structure has now been adopted. I think a lot of people that have already made the transition, those of organizations that have the 9 and the 14,001 and the 18,001, have been going, great, we have the 9 and the 14,001, which has the high-level structure, but we're still waiting for the health and safety side to have the same structure, which has meant a bit of a delay. And so now we have the 45,001, which is now aligned, firmly aligned with the other management system standards. I mentioned that the 27,001 standard has also transitioned as well. The idea is that all management system standards will transition to the new high-level structure. There may be a few that won't, but most of them will go over to this high-level structure, the 10 clauses. So there really was a push to change from the 18,001, take all the good parts of it, put them into the 45,001, and make sure that certain elements were emphasized as well. we talk about transition, it's funny really, because in some ways we're not transitioning. We actually have a new standard. We can't use that 18,001 number, because there already is there's an 18,000. It's all to do with radio frequency, so we can't use that. It's a standard already, so we can't use that number. So we can talk about transitioning in respect of taking the information that was in the 18,000, it's gone into the 45,001, and there's quite a lot of information that's gone over just the same. So the transition has been really with the high-level structure and the terms and the terminology. However, there are some new requirements, some specific additions that we can see within the detail of the clauses that have been added. So we can see that there's many more requirements for leaders and what leaders are expected to do. So some chapters, are pretty much the same as the 18,001, and we know that 40% of the 45,001 is the same as we see as the basic requirements in this Annex SL. Remember I said the Annex SL at the back of the ISO directive gives the basic requirements. That basic requirements, we find it in the 45,001, but then we get the health and safety requirements, and we now also get additional requirements that we didn't find in 18,001. So we've got some new things in there. We have new definitions of worker, workplace, participation, consultation. They're split. And we have new definitions of risk. So let's have a look. Worker. A worker is now defined as a person performing work or work-related activities that are under control of your organisation. Whereas the workplace, that's the place under the control of an organisation where somebody actually performs work or needs to go for work. Participation and consultation have been split. Consultation, that's seeking views before you make a decision. And the participation is actually being involved in decision making. Risk, at its most fundamental, is described as the effect of uncertainty. Can be positive, can be negative. And we tend in health and safety to talk about events, consequence, likelihoods as well. But it's now been defined in a much more clear way in the 45,001. Benefits, first of all. Benefits, just to refresh your mind on the benefits of the standard. Lots of benefits with putting the 45,000 standard into place in your organisation. We want to reduce work-related injuries, illnesses, and death and diseases. And this can really help. Helps with implementing policies to achieve our objectives. Demonstrates leaderships. Reduces risks in our tasks and our activities. We want to always improve performance. It will hopefully improve our brand and our reputation as a company, as an organisation. It is easier to comply with other standards because it's easier to integrate because of the high-level structure. It improves management of accidents as well. Improves insurance premiums as well. They can be reduced. And we're also wanting to make sure that we can reduce any kind of worker absenteeism, injury costs due to accidents and incidents. And because it's an international standard, communicate as well. So when we are looking to transition, what do we need to do? If you have not got the 18,001 standard at all, you need to understand what the standard is. So learn the standard. Create a team of people to help implement this standard. Conduct a self-assessment and draw up an action plan of things that you need to do. make an analysis of the context of your organisation and review your scope, your goals, your processes and all your documented information. Call in Bureau Veritas to help you as well, because they will also provide training and also gap analysis if you're requiring this. If you do have the 18001, even though it's been withdrawn, you have 3 years to make the transition. And the International Accreditation Forum, or the IAF, has stated that there will be a minimum, it could be more than this, a minimum of 1 day additional time shall be added to the duration of either a surveillance audit, a recertification audit, or a special audit to effectively evaluate the changes and the effectiveness of implementation of the new parts of the 45001 standard. So you will have an additional day, but it could be more depending on the complexity of your organisation. What do we need to do? Train your team. Make sure your team understands what the 45,000 is about. Have a look at your processes. Make sure they're compliant. And understand if there are any legal requirements that you need to adhere to. And if you're not, why you are not, and what you're going to do about it. Integrate into your business processes. If you have an environmental management system, integrate. Make sure it's not added on, that everybody is talking the same words and singing the same tune with regards to health and safety. Monitor. So you integrate and then you check, you monitor and see, are the processes working? Have we got everything in place that we need to do? And then hopefully get your certification. What do I need to do if I'm already certified? Again, hopefully I've addressed that as well with regards to the standard, the 45,001. If you're already certified to OHSAS 18,001, you've got 3 years to make the transition. And like I say, you need to discuss with Bureau Veritas and find out, okay, how many additional days are we going to need depending on the complexity of our business? How many additional days will we need for you to make sure that we are effectively complying to the 45,001 standard?